The morning sun glinted off the water as Michael Harrington stood at the edge of his deck, coffee mug in hand. At 62, his posture remained military straight, a habit formed during his 30 years in the Navy. Though he'd been retired from active duty for 7 years, the discipline remained, in his precisely trimmed silver hair, in the way he still rose before dawn, in the methodical approach he took to every aspect of his life. From his backyard, he could see the Chesapeake Bay stretching toward the horizon. He and Elizabeth had chosen this house specifically for this view, a daily reminder of the sea that had shaped his life and their marriage. Another beautiful morning, he murmured to himself, checking his watch. It was 6:15 a.m. In Singapore, where he'd been for the past 3 weeks on a maritime consulting job, it would be evening. He'd be calling Elizabeth soon, as he did every day when away, but first he needed to finish packing. His flight wasn't until tomorrow, but Michael Harrington was never unprepared. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Jim Chen, his contact at the Singapore shipping company. "Captain Harrington," Jim said, using the title Michael still carried with pride, "I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news. The regulatory approval for the project has been delayed indefinitely. There's no point in you staying on." "Months, possibly." "Politics," Jim sighed. "We'll compensate you for the full contract, of course, but there's no reason for you to remain in Singapore." After ending the call, Michael considered his options. He could stay and enjoy a few days in Singapore, perhaps visit some naval colleagues stationed there. But the practical side of him, the side that had commanded ships and men through storms, both literal and figurative, saw no purpose in delay. He'd return home early and surprise Elizabeth. 24 hours later, Michael's taxi pulled into the driveway of their colonial-style home in Annapolis. It was just past noon, and Elizabeth's car was gone, likely at her volunteer work with the Naval Officers' Spouses Association, where she'd been active for decades. Michael paid the driver and wheeled his luggage to the front door. Inside, the house was quiet and immaculate, just as they always kept it. He brought his suitcase upstairs to their bedroom, then decided to shower away the long flight. Opening the linen closet for a fresh towel, he noticed an unfamiliar toiletry bag on the middle shelf. It was a leather dop kit, masculine in design, containing men's deodorant, shaving cream, and cologne he didn't recognize. Michael stared at it, momentarily confused. His first thought was that it belonged to their son James, who occasionally visited with his family from Richmond. He pulled out his phone and dialed James's number. "Project got canceled. I just got home," Michael explained. "Quick question. Have you been staying at the house recently?" After hanging up, Michael returned to the bathroom, the unfamiliar toiletry bag now sitting on the counter. He opened it again, examining the contents more carefully. The cologne was expensive, not something a casual guest would leave behind. And why would Elizabeth put a guest's belongings in their private bathroom rather than the guest bathroom downstairs? A sense of unease settled over him as he stepped into the shower. Under the hot water, his mind cycled through rational explanations. Perhaps it belonged to one of their other sons. Maybe Elizabeth was storing it for a friend. There had to be a simple answer. Wrapped in a towel, Michael went to their bedroom to dress. As he opened his drawer for clean clothes, he noticed something out of place in Elizabeth's dresser, which stood open across the room. A flash of red caught his eye. Lingerie he'd never seen before, partially hidden beneath her usual practical undergarments. In 35 years of marriage, he'd given Elizabeth lingerie as gifts on several occasions, but she'd always gently declined to wear them, saying they were impractical and not really her style. Yet here was something that looked brand new, and a style far more revealing than anything he'd ever seen her wear. Michael dressed slowly, his military mind already shifting into reconnaissance mode. He went downstairs to Elizabeth's home office and opened her desk drawer where they kept household records. The phone bill was on top. He flipped through it, noting multiple calls to the same number when he was traveling, calls that didn't appear when he was home. Moving methodically through the house, Michael checked their home security system. They'd installed it 2 years ago, primarily for peace of mind when he traveled. He hadn't thought much about it since then, trusting Elizabeth to set it when needed. Now he pulled up the app on his tablet and reviewed recent footage. What he saw made his stomach clench. 3 days ago, while he was still in Singapore, a man had entered their home using a key. The camera captured him clearly, tall, well-dressed, perhaps in his late 50s. The man moved through their home with the comfort of familiarity, not the caution of an intruder. 2 hours later, the footage showed him leaving. Michael sat heavily on the couch, the tablet still in his hands. The evidence was mounting, but his mind resisted the conclusion. Elizabeth, his wife of 35 years, the mother of his 3 sons, the woman who had waited faithfully through countless deployments, couldn't possibly be having an affair. Over the next 3 days, Michael maintained the fiction that he was still in Singapore. He sent Elizabeth texts at appropriate times, asked about her day, mentioned meetings that never happened. Meanwhile, he conducted his investigation with the same thoroughness that had characterized his naval career. He followed Elizabeth on Tuesday morning, maintaining a careful distance in a rental car as she drove not to the community center where she volunteered, but to a waterfront condominium complex. She parked and entered a building carrying a small overnight bag. Michael noted the address and waited. 3 hours later, she emerged with a man, the same man from the security footage. They kissed in the parking lot before Elizabeth got into her car and drove away. Michael resisted the urge to confront them then and there. He needed more information, more certainty. Back at home, while Elizabeth was at her actual volunteer shift, Michael searched her email. He found nothing suspicious in her primary account, the one they occasionally shared for family communications. But when he checked her browser history, he discovered a second email account he'd never known about. The password was easy to guess, the name of her childhood dog followed by her birth year, the same combination she used for many accounts. Inside were hundreds of emails between Elizabeth and someone named James Whitaker, dating back nearly 2 years. Michael read them chronologically, each message driving the knife deeper. They had met at an art class Elizabeth had taken, something she'd started after Michael encouraged her to pursue interests beyond her volunteer work once their youngest son left for college. The early emails were innocent enough, discussions about technique, recommendations for art supplies. But they quickly evolved into flirtation, then explicit exchanges, then detailed plans for their meetings. What gutted Michael most weren't the physical details of their affair, though those were painful enough. It was the intimacy of their conversations, the way Elizabeth shared details of her marriage with this stranger, the way she complained about Michael's frequent absences, the way she discussed their finances. In one email from 6 months ago, she wrote, "James, I've been thinking about what you said, about using some of Michael's pension for our trip to France next year. He'd never know. He leaves all the day-to-day finances to me anyway. We deserve this, don't we?" Michael closed the laptop, feeling physically ill. In his 30 years of naval service, he'd faced storms that threatened to capsize his ship, mechanical failures that could have been catastrophic, even hostile forces in international waters. But nothing had prepared him for this betrayal from the person he trusted most. That evening, when Elizabeth returned home, Michael maintained his cover, calling her from his hotel room as if still overseas. He listened to her voice carefully, searching for signs of deception he might have missed all these years. "The house feels empty without you," she said, and he wondered if she actually meant it. After hanging up, Michael called his former XO, Commander Frank Reynolds, now also retired. "Frank, I need your counsel," Michael said after they'd exchanged greetings. Michael explained the situation in the direct manner of a military briefing. The evidence he'd gathered, the confirmation of his wife's infidelity, the discovery that her lover knew details of their finances. Frank was silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Mike. That's a tough situation. What are you planning to do?" "I'm considering my options. Direct confrontation seems most straightforward." "Before you go in guns blazing, make sure you've secured your position," Frank advised. "Document everything. Protect your assets. Then decide if this is a salvage operation or if you're abandoning ship." Michael appreciated Frank's nautical metaphors. They provided a familiar framework for an unfamiliar crisis. "Roger that. I'll keep you informed." That night, in his hotel room, Michael reviewed his findings like a mission dossier. The affair had been ongoing for nearly 2 years. Elizabeth met James primarily when Michael traveled, though occasionally they used James's condominium. They had discussed using Michael's pension for their own plans. They had brought this man into the home Michael had worked his entire career to provide. As a naval officer, Michael had been trained to make difficult decisions under pressure. He'd learned to compartmentalize emotions, to focus on the mission at hand. Those skills served him now as he planned his next steps with strategic precision. 3 days later, on their 35th wedding anniversary, Michael put his plan into action. He had made reservations at Harbor Lights, an upscale restaurant overlooking the Naval Academy where he had once taught. From their table, they would have a clear view of the ships in the harbor, a fitting backdrop for what he needed to do. He called Elizabeth that morning, telling her he'd managed to get an earlier flight home. "I couldn't miss our anniversary," he said, maintaining the fiction that he'd just returned from Singapore. "Oh, "That's wonderful," she exclaimed, and he wondered if the enthusiasm in her voice was genuine or if she was disappointed that her plans with James would be interrupted. When Michael arrived home that afternoon, Elizabeth greeted him with a hug and kiss that felt hollow now that he knew the truth. He noticed how she quickly checked her phone after embracing him, presumably messaging James about the change in plans. "Productive, until the project got canceled," he replied, sticking close to the truth where possible. Another lesson from his naval career. At dinner they were seated at a window table with a panoramic view of the harbor. Elizabeth looked elegant in a blue dress that matched her eyes, her blonde hair styled in the soft waves he had always admired. For a moment, looking at her across the candlelit table, Michael could almost forget what he had discovered, almost believe they were simply celebrating another year of their life together. But the weight of the evidence he carried, both literally in his briefcase and figuratively in his heart, made that impossible. They ordered drinks and appetizers, making small talk about the neighborhood, their sons, the upcoming summer season. Michael waited until after the main course, when their plates had been cleared and they were alone with their wine. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice steady, "I need to ask you something important." Michael reached into his briefcase and placed a folder on the table between them. "Who is James Whittaker?" The color drained from Elizabeth's face. Her hand, reaching for her wineglass, froze midair. "What?" "James Whittaker," Michael repeated, opening the folder to reveal a printed photograph of the man entering their home. "The man who has a key to our house. The man you've been seeing for the past 2 years." "Michael, I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her eyes betrayed her. "Please don't lie to me, Elizabeth. Not anymore." His voice remained calm, controlled, the same voice he had used on the bridge of his ship during crisis situations. "I know about the art classes. I know about his condominium on Waterfront Drive. I know about the plans for France using my pension." He laid out the evidence methodically, the security footage, the phone records, the emails he had discovered. With each item, Elizabeth's denials weakened, until finally she fell silent, staring at the damning collection of her deception. "How did you find all this?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible over the restaurant's ambient noise. Her eyes widened. 4 days? You've been home for 4 days? Where have you been staying?" "That's your question? Not an explanation for betraying our marriage? Not an apology for bringing another man into our home?" Michael's composure slipped slightly, his voice taking on an edge. Elizabeth glanced around nervously, aware that nearby diners might overhear. "Michael, please. This isn't the place." "I think it's the perfect place," he interrupted. "Right here, where we can see the Naval Academy, where I spent my career preparing officers to serve with honor and integrity. 2 qualities you seem to have forgotten." "That's not fair," Elizabeth hissed, anger replacing her initial shock. "You want to talk about honor? What about the honor of being present in a marriage? Do you know how many nights I spent alone while you were at sea? How many school events you missed? How many holidays I celebrated with just a phone call from some distant port?" "I was serving my country," Michael replied, his jaw tightening. "You knew what military life entailed when you married me." "I was 22. I had no idea what it really meant to be a military wife. To raise 3 boys essentially alone. To move every few years. To always come second to the Navy. And that justifies betraying me? Betraying our vows?" Michael shook his head. "You could have talked to me. You could have asked for a divorce if you were that unhappy." "It never is, but bringing another man into our home, planning to use my pension for trips with your lover, that was a choice, Elizabeth. A series of choices you made every day for 2 years. Tears welled in her eyes. "I still love you, Michael. This thing with James, it's complicated, but it doesn't change how I feel about you." Michael stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman before him with the one he had believed he knew for 35 years. "If that's what love means to you, then we have very different definitions." He signaled for the check, paid it silently, and stood. From his pocket, he withdrew his wedding ring and placed it on the table. "I deserved better than this, Elizabeth. Not perfection, just honesty." As he walked out of Harbor Lights, leaving Elizabeth sitting alone at their anniversary table, Michael felt the weight of 3.5 decades pressing on his shoulders. Behind him lay the ruins of what he had believed was a faithful marriage. Ahead lay uncertain waters he had never expected to navigate. The following week passed in a blur of practical arrangements. Michael rented a waterfront apartment not far from the Naval Academy, a temporary arrangement while he figured out his next steps. He hired Lawrence Keller, a military-friendly attorney recommended by Frank, to handle the divorce proceedings. Given the evidence of infidelity and the fact that she was planning to misappropriate your pension, we're in a strong position, Lawrence explained during their first meeting. Virginia still considers adultery in divorce proceedings. Michael nodded, taking notes in the same precise handwriting he had used for ship's logs throughout his career. I don't want to destroy her financially. We raised 3 sons together. That counts for something. Understood, Captain. But we need to protect your interests, especially your pension. That's your financial security after decades of service. When Michael returned to the house to collect more of his belongings, he discovered Elizabeth had been using their joint credit card to buy gifts for James, expensive watches, designer clothes, weekend getaways labeled as art retreats. The betrayal extended beyond the emotional and physical into the financial, a violation of the partnership he thought they had built. Working with Lawrence, Michael froze their joint accounts and redirected his pension deposits to a new account in his name only. He left Elizabeth with access to her own retirement funds and a reasonable amount in their checking account, enough to live on, but not enough to finance her affair. The most difficult task was informing their sons. Michael insisted on doing it himself, refusing to let them hear about the divorce from anyone else. He invited all 3 to his apartment on a Sunday afternoon. James, their oldest at 34, arrived first with his wife, Sarah. Matthew, 31, came next, followed by Christopher, 28. They sat in Michael's sparse living room, confusion evident on their faces. "Dad, what's going on?" James asked. "Mom's been calling us, crying, but she won't say what's wrong." The silence that followed was deafening. Then all 3 began speaking at once. Michael raised his hand, the same gesture he had used to quiet excited junior officers on his ship. "Your mother has been having an affair for the past 2 years. I discovered it when I returned early from Singapore last week." He explained the situation as directly as possible, omitting the most painful details, but providing enough information that they understood the gravity of the betrayal. As he spoke, he watched their expressions shift from shock to disbelief to anger. "With her art teacher?" Christopher asked incredulously. "The guy she was always talking about?" "I met him once," Matthew said quietly, "when I visited last summer. He stopped by the house to, quote, drop off some supplies." Mom introduced him as her instructor. James, the oldest, had remained silent, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Does he have other students he's sleeping with?" he finally asked. "I don't know," Michael answered honestly. "But I've learned he has a history of relationships with military wives. He seems to target women whose husbands travel frequently. I'm telling you this because you deserve the truth," Michael continued. "But I don't want you to feel caught in the middle. Your mother is still your mother. My issues with her don't change that." Christopher shook his head. "How are we supposed to just accept this? She cheated on you, Dad. For years." "You'll find your own way to process this," Michael said. "I'm not asking you to choose sides. I'm just asking you to understand my decision." After his sons left, Michael stood at his apartment window, looking out at the water. The conversation had gone as well as could be expected, but he knew the family dynamics had been permanently altered. Holidays, birthdays, future grandchildren's events, all would now require careful navigation. The following day, Michael received a call from James Whitaker's employer, the Annapolis Art Institute. He had sent them a carefully worded letter detailing Whitaker's pattern of pursuing relationships with students, specifically military wives, along with evidence from Elizabeth's emails. The Institute, which received significant funding from military-affiliated organizations, took the matter seriously. "Captain Harrington, this is Dean Roberts from the Art Institute. I wanted to inform you that we've placed Mr. Whitaker on administrative leave pending an investigation. Our code of ethics strictly prohibits romantic relationships between instructors and students." "I appreciate your taking this seriously," Michael replied. "I believe there may be other women he's approached in similar circumstances. Yes, our preliminary investigation suggests a pattern. We'll be conducting a thorough review." Michael hadn't sought revenge, merely accountability. The fact that Whitaker would likely lose his position was simply a natural consequence of his actions, something any naval officer would understand. As summer approached, the practical aspects of the divorce proceeded methodically. The house would be sold, the proceeds divided. Their retirement accounts would be separated according to the agreement their attorneys had negotiated. Personal property was cataloged and divided, a process that reduced 35 years of marriage to lists on spreadsheets. The emotional terrain proved more difficult to navigate. Michael found himself avoiding certain restaurants, certain parks, places that held memories of happier times. He threw himself into his consulting work, accepting assignments that kept him busy, but no longer taking the extended overseas projects that had given Elizabeth the freedom to pursue her affair. The military community in Annapolis was small, and news traveled quickly. Michael found himself receiving invitations from fellow retired officers, some of whom had experienced similar betrayals. The wives of his former colleagues reached out as well, often revealing that they had suspected Elizabeth's affair but hadn't known how to address it. "We saw them together at the marina last summer," admitted Catherine, the wife of his former communications officer. "It seemed intimate, but without proof. I didn't want to cause problems in your marriage." "I understand," Michael assured her, though part of him wished someone had told him sooner. The most difficult family event was Christopher's graduation from his medical residency program. Both Michael and Elizabeth attended, sitting on opposite sides of the auditorium. At the reception afterward, they maintained a civil distance, interacting only when necessary for photographs. "This is weird," Christopher confided to his father during a quiet moment. "Mom keeps trying to act like everything's normal." "For today, maybe that's not the worst approach," Michael suggested. "This is your achievement, not our drama." "Dad, I know you said not to take sides, but—" Christopher hesitated. "I'm angry with her. Really angry. She had everything. A great husband, a beautiful home, 3 sons who adored her. And she threw it away for what? Some sleazy art teacher?" Michael placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Your mother made choices I don't understand and can't forgive. But she's still the woman who sat by your hospital bed for 3 days when you had pneumonia at age 8, who drove you to hockey practice at 5 a.m. for years, who cried with pride when you got into medical school. Try to remember that version of her too." It was advice Michael struggled to follow himself. In quiet moments, when the anger subsided, he found himself mourning not just the end of his marriage, but the loss of the woman he thought he had known. Had any of it been real? Had she ever truly loved him, or had she simply adapted to the life he provided? In late June, Michael joined a veteran support group at Frank's suggestion. Initially reluctant, he had always handled problems privately. He found unexpected comfort in the company of other former service members facing personal challenges. "The hardest part," he admitted during his second meeting, "is feeling like a failure. I commanded ships through storms and combat zones. I led hundreds of sailors, but I couldn't see what was happening in my own home." "That's not on you, Captain," said Rodriguez, a former Marine. "You were trained to trust your crew, to believe your officers when they reported all systems normal. Your wife betrayed that trust. That's on her, not you." The group's perspective, viewing his situation through the lens of military values like honor, duty, and loyalty, helped Michael process his anger in healthier ways. Instead of dwelling on Elizabeth's betrayal, he began focusing on rebuilding his life with the same determination he had once applied to naval operations. He purchased an old sailboat, a 36-foot sloop that had seen better days, and began restoring it on weekends. The physical labor of sanding, painting, and repairing provided both exercise and therapy. He named it New Horizon, a name that felt both appropriate and hopeful. It was while purchasing supplies for the boat that Michael ran into Catherine Miller, a former Navy nurse he had known during his early career. They had served together on the USS Mercy during a humanitarian mission in the Pacific. Now widowed after a long marriage to another naval officer, Catherine was volunteering at the Maritime Museum near the harbor. "Captain Harrington!" "What a surprise!" She greeted him warmly in the marine supply store. "I heard you were still in the area." "At least. I recognized you immediately, though. You haven't changed much." They caught up over coffee, sharing stories of their naval service and the paths their lives had taken since. Michael found himself mentioning his divorce, something he usually avoided in casual conversation. "I'm sorry to hear that," Catherine said, her expression compassionate without pity. "John, my husband, passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. Different circumstances, but I understand the adjustment to life alone after decades of partnership." There was something refreshing about Catherine's straightforward manner, a clarity that reminded Michael of the best officers he had served with. They exchanged numbers, promising to meet again. Over the following weeks, as summer heat settled over Annapolis, Michael and Catherine developed a friendship based on shared experiences and mutual respect. She joined him occasionally on sailing excursions on his newly restored boat, comfortable with the nautical terminology and routines that had structured both their lives. "You're different with her," Frank observed after meeting Catherine at a 4th of July gathering. "More like your old self." "I didn't suggest otherwise. But friendship with the right person can be healing." As his divorce proceedings neared completion, Michael found himself thinking more about the future than the past. The sale of the house he had shared with Elizabeth was finalized, the proceeds divided according to their agreement. He purchased a smaller home closer to the water, with a dock for his sailboat and a spare bedroom for when his sons visited. Elizabeth, he heard through their sons, had moved to a condominium in a different part of Annapolis. James Whitaker had indeed lost his position at the Art Institute and was now teaching private lessons from his home. Whether their relationship continued, Michael didn't know or care to know. The details of Elizabeth's life were no longer his concern. What did concern him was rebuilding his relationship with his grandchildren, who had been confused by the sudden change in their grandparents' living arrangements. Michael established new traditions with them, sailing lessons for the older ones, stories of naval adventures for the younger ones, and regular video calls when he couldn't see them in person. "Grandpa, Mom says you and Grandma don't love each other anymore," his 6-year-old granddaughter asked during one visit. "Is that true?" Michael considered his answer carefully. "Sometimes, sweetheart. Grown-ups change in ways that make it hard for them to stay married. But we both still love you and your brothers very much. That will never change." It was a simplified explanation, but one that seemed to satisfy her. Children, like sailors, appreciated clear, honest communication, even about difficult subjects. As fall approached, Michael's divorce was finalized with an equitable settlement that protected his pension while providing Elizabeth with sufficient resources to maintain her lifestyle. He signed the papers in his attorney's office, feeling a complex mix of regret and relief. "It's never easy," Lawrence said, "no matter the circumstances. But you've handled this with dignity, Captain. Not everyone does." That evening, Michael sat on the deck of his new home, watching the sunset over the water. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Heard today was the final day. How are you doing?" "Better than expected," he replied. "Having dinner on the deck. Care to join me?" An hour later, they sat together, sharing a bottle of wine and a simple meal Michael had prepared. The conversation flowed easily, touching on books they'd read, mutual acquaintances, plans for the upcoming holiday season. "I've been thinking about taking New Horizon on an extended trip," Michael mentioned as they finished their wine. "Down the coast, maybe as far as the Florida Keys. Spend the winter somewhere warm. A few months, perhaps. I need to navigate new waters, I suppose, literally and figuratively. After Thanksgiving, I want to be here for the holiday with my sons and their families." Michael looked at her, considering. "It doesn't have to be, if the right first mate were interested." Catherine smiled. "I might know someone with decent nautical skills and a flexible schedule, someone who also appreciates the value of charting a new course." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge over the bay. Michael thought about the journey ahead, not just the sailing trip, but the larger voyage of rebuilding a life he had never expected to navigate alone. The betrayal that had ended his marriage would always be part of his story, a storm that had altered his course. But as a naval officer, he had learned that what defined a successful voyage wasn't the absence of storms, but how you sailed through them, the resilience, the adaptability, the determination to reach new shores. "I think I'd like that," Michael said finally, having company on this journey. 3 months later, as winter settled over Annapolis, the New Horizon sailed out of the harbor with Michael at the helm and Catherine beside him. Behind them lay the wreckage of broken vows and betrayed trust. Ahead stretched open water, challenging, unpredictable, but full of possibility. As they navigated past the Naval Academy where his career had begun, Michael felt a sense of closure. His marriage had ended, but his story continued. The captain's last voyage with Elizabeth had concluded, but a new journey was just beginning, one charted with hard-earned wisdom and the courage to trust again. The sea had always been his true companion, constant even when human relationships proved fragile. Now, with the wind filling the sails and Catherine's steady presence beside him, Michael Harrington set course for the horizon, ready to discover what waited beyond the familiar waters of his past.